As folks kind of join us, hello everyone. My name is Kathryn. My pronouns are she and her. I'm a senior community animator for Communities Ending Poverty here at the Tamarack Institute. Joining me today is my wonderful and lovely colleague, Heather Keam, who specializes in asset based community development. She's here to support today, and this webinar is actually inspired by an article that she wrote in 2023, sharing belonging as a cornerstone in poverty reduction as our next phase of life. Because it's already 10:04 here on the West Coast and 1:04 for people in eastern provinces, we're going to move, or in the central provinces, we're going to move right along. Of course, we'd love to start off with the land acknowledgement. It's really important that we just situate ourselves where we are. Today, I'm in Kwantlen and Katsi territory, also known as Langley, British Columbia. This is not my home community, but I'm here at my mother-in-law's house. Turtle Island and our Earth Mother has been home since time immemorial to the ancestors of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and we recognize in this territory, Indigenous rights holders have endured historical oppressions and continue to endure inequities that have largely resulted from the widespread failure of non-Indigenous treaty people such as myself to hold up our responsibilities. And recognizing, of course, that Indigenous people continue to have disproportionate numbers of their population living inside of poverty. Here at Tamarack, this is one of my favorite practices, is to also talk about African ancestral acknowledgements and acknowledge those who came to this place as settlers, as migrants in this generation or in generations past, and those of us who came involuntarily, particularly those brought to these lands as a result of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. Tamarack wishes to pay tribute to those ancestors of African origin and descent and thank them for their contributions towards transforming systems in ways that promote everyone's sense of belonging and safety. For my own family, I'm grateful for my sisters, Judith and Vanessa, whose grandmother came over into Africville through the Underground Railroad.
Just a couple of tech considerations before we get started. Because we're using the Zoom webinar format, the only way to interact with our presenters today will be through the chat. And if you have any questions that come up as they're presenting, we really encourage you to use the Q&A panel so that you can upvote each other's questions, and for when we have time, we can address the questions that most people want answers to. If you can't find the Q&A panel, there's a little circle at the bottom or top of your screen with an ellipses in it that says more, and you should be able to find the Q&A panel there. And yes, when the presenters are asking questions, please feel free to respond in the chat as well. We also want to acknowledge that we're trying to create a respectful virtual space here together. We're dialing in from all over the place. So by participating in this event, you agree to participate with openness and respect for all. We center equity, inclusion, and a sense of connection across all people here. I'll turn it back to you.
So this is one of my favorite slides that has existed for Tamarack as long as I've been doing poverty reduction in my own community and as a recipient of Tamarack's services. And just welcome to our webinar. We believe true community change occurs when we adopt new ways of thinking and working together. This is especially important for us today because as we go into the learning zone, if you don't mind, Orpa. Many of you have probably seen this slide. We know where the comfort zone is. It's where we hold our work, where we feel comfortable, where we're, content experts or experts in our work. This is a really nice place for us to sit. Today, we're hoping to nudge you into the learning zone by starting to rethink some of the systems that we are working through and in some ways reinforcing. This goes for myself too. I've been a social worker for a long time, creating programs and different things to fill gaps in community. And so as we were discussing this webinar, I'm really talking about how to take a different systems approach. I personally felt some affronting emotions as I was writing some of our things today. And so we want you to be okay with being in that learning zone, but as soon as start to feel overwhelming, upsetting, any of those things, we're in the alarm zone. So please care for yourself today, drink water, take a break. You're under no obligation whatsoever to stay in this webinar. If you need to go and come back, you're welcome to do that. And we always send out the recording and all of the resources so you won't miss out on anything. Next, Barb. Yeah, thank you. So today, to ground us into some just some concepts and understanding why we're here today. Outside of that wonderful article that you wrote, Heather, that inspired this webinar series, we just want to talk about. Sorry, we want to talk about the social impacts of poverty, the things that we try to sort of hit on in our poverty reduction strategies. So we know that marginalization and discrimination deepen exclusion from community life, and that isolation is both a risk factor for and a result of material poverty, and that social poverty exists when people are isolated and lack the supports that they need for resilience at any financial level, and that disconnection reduces material, emotional, and caregiving supports. Next door. And so some from the Canadian Poverty Institute, these are key trends that they monitored last year in 2024. You can see for yourself, a quarter of Canadians don't have people that they can depend on when in need. 30, like over a third of Canadians reported weak community belonging. And wow, 43.9% feel that they can still trust others. But what is happening to that 56.1% of folks out there that don't feel like they can trust the people in their own communities? For poverty risk, we know that 66% of people living alone are in or at risk of poverty. We know that over 20% of recent immigrants are in or at risk of poverty, especially if they've come through the Temporary Foreign Workers Program, which I'd love to highlight that the UN has said is a path to modern day slavery, as well as like almost 20% of racialized people are in or at risk of poverty, and that includes Black, Indigenous, people of color. And then for discrimination, 30%, almost a third of Canadians over the age of 15 experienced some form of discrimination last year. This is why we're here today. Thanks, ARPA. So, Heather, my friend, asset-based community development, if you can just tell us a little bit about what asset-based community development is as a lens and a framework, just to ground us in our conversation today.
Thank you, Kathryn. And I do apologize. I am in a Tim Hortons on my way to do an asset-based community workshop, 2-day workshop. So I apologize for background noise. Asset-based community development, or ABCD, is not new. I want to preface that. It has been done in many Indigenous cultures, many African cultures. It's also in many religions. And so it's not new, but it was coined by John McKnight and Jody Kretzmann in the late 1980s. When they did some research, they collected 3,000 stories about a time when neighbors came together to improve their area. And what I love is that they found 6 types of assets and resources that can contribute to local well-being. The primary goal of asset-based community development process is to enhance the collective visioning and production. So I want to emphasize production through a process. And so it's a lens that we put on our work to help community focus on assets and strengths and not problems and needs. It helps to identify those who are on the margins, those who are on the outside, and how can we bring them into the center. It identifies and mobilizes community and individuals so that they have ownership, a sense of purpose to do what they do best, which is community. It builds leadership. Leadership skills with unusual leaders, not our traditional leaders. And lastly, but most important, it builds relationships and trust in our community. And it's a lens. It's not a framework. It's not a checkbox. It's not like a linear thing. It's a way up.
Thank you so much, Heather. If you want to just touch a little bit on this belonging equation, and then we'll talk about how we're going to have this conversation today.
Yeah, so I have been really thinking about belonging for a long time. As someone who took 14 years to feel like I belong in a community that I've now in for 20 years, I was really thinking about, how can we understand belonging in a way that we know what we need to do? And so this belonging equation, the bottom part is not mine. but I've been working on that sense of community belonging, also asset-based community development, and how the two could come together. And so on the bottom, known, noticed, and missed, it's about how do you know the people in your community? How do you know the people you're working with? Recognizing them, you see their faces, you know, they come in. Notice is where you notice their gifts, their assets, their abilities. And then, and we do the known and noticed very well. The missed is where we need to really emphasize. When you miss somebody, when you say, Heather, I missed you, I missed your smile, I miss seeing you, that grounds me in a sense of belonging in that group, in that program, in that activity. Now, on top is, in order for us to be able to do the known, notice, and missed, we need to help create a sense of purpose for people. And we also need to think and shift power. And we have to do this in place. And so if there's any teachers out there, I'm sorry, because this is not a traditional equation, but this is just a way to help. What are those elements and those things that we need to build a sense of belonging?
Thank you, Heather. So to frame our conversation today, okay, first of all, I just want to say hello, Courtney Harrop from Plum and Territory. Uh, my dear friend Courtney Harrop is here as a surprise. I'm totally amazed. Our child calls her Cookie because he can't say Courtney. And Courtney is a person that has really mentored me in mutual aid and creating programs that are developed and run by people with lived experience. And so a lot of what we have to say today, I think will resonate with you, Courtney, but also really has shifted sort of myself back to that person-centered space. So it was really nice to see you in the chat today, Courtney. Um, yeah, spilling the beans. Yes, Auntie Cookie is in the chat. Okay, amazing. Auntie Cookie is here. So today we're going to spend some time. So we're going to frame our conversation in three parts: where we've been, where we are, and where we can go. So really, we're going to spend some time on the philosophy of poverty, poverty reduction programs, and issues such as mandate versus person-centeredness. And then part two will really support the practical micro, meso, and macro actions that can build belonging to disrupt overall poverty, all of which we will support through an asset-based community development way of being, not a lens. Thank you, Heather. But today we'll have the opportunity to examine sort of like our poverty reduction movement. And we'll just start with where we've been. Thank you, Orpa. So if we go to the next slide, we'll talk about the old poverty paradigm. So poverty-based charity program work in the last 50 years is actually just recent history in the history of poverty reduction. We know that Aristotle, for example, said that poverty is the parent of revolution and crime, right? And so like the idea of charitable helping of the poor and all of these things is actually a really ancient practice. But for our purposes today, we're just going to really talk about government mandates, social programming, and that sort of social safety net that has been created either by government or through nonprofit organizations and other service community, like faith-based groups and others, just to really like kind of frame where we've been in recent history in the poverty reduction movement. We've always focused on needs met rather than people empowered. So that's really a mandate-centered versus person-centered space to be, even though we know that trying to serve people in dignity to get them their basic needs met is a noble cause. In no way are we throwing shade on the folks that build programs to fill gaps in community. That's actually not the purpose of this discussion. It's really about critically examining how we serve people and how we can do that better in a way that feels really person-led. So today we know that top-down approaches kind of overshadow that community wisdom. There's not a lot of mechanisms to hear what people's true needs are. And then there's also like funding and other structures that we simply can't control that create this reinforcing mandate space. And I really want to appreciate Heather, who I know in her own way is a faith-based person, for introducing us to When Helping Hurts. We'll talk a little bit about that resource today. It's a Christian resource that really examines the charity or helping the poor model, and understanding that those mechanisms can actually cause harm and not empower the folks that are, coping with poverty every day, but still have like a lot to give in their lives. And so, we maintain dependency by just focusing on urgent and downstream pieces instead of like strengthening people's agencies, which is really a generational and upstream approach. As I said, my friend Courtney's on the call today, and what we decided early when we were dealing with some urgent toxic drug emergency pieces was really that anything downstream that we created had to have an upstream link. And so that felt really positive, like we were being kind of pushed into this larger space. And it really like helped us create some interesting opportunities for folks that wouldn't normally be considered employable and other things. But it's not about those programs today. It's about really just looking at the movement as a whole. So today we're just going to begin with the humility. This is where we've been focused on systems, mandates, services, but services stabilize, right? We stabilize folks rather than liberate them. And we know that helping the poor, as we said, is an ancient practice. And here we are today trying to refocus our place in this movement. So when mandates cause harm, when we think we're serving the poor, we often serve our mandates. And that can cause harm because belonging and not programming is really what changes people's trajectories. You can go to the next one, please, Arpa. So top-down approaches rarely create change. We've been trapped in a pattern of solving from above. And there's a lot of good reasons for that. Alleviating our neighbor's suffering is an important part of being human. And we do our best in these systems to create programs that work for folks. But belonging, trust, and co-creation has never started at the top, and it never will come from the top. That starts in the street, in homes, and in our everyday relationships. So I love this quote from Steve Corbett. If we reduce human beings to being simply physical, as Western thought is prone to do, our poverty alleviation efforts will tend to focus on material solutions. But if we remember that humans are spiritual, social, psychological, and physical beings, our poverty alleviation efforts will become more holistic in their design and execution. So when helping becomes the goal rather than strengthening, we can reinforce systems that trap people in cycles that we're trying to dismantle. Do you want to add anything to that, Heather? Not yet. We'll keep going. Because Heather's traveling, I'm just going to call on her to offer insights, and she'll be able to chime in when she can. So meeting needs does not build futures. We've met the needs. We've met so many needs that folks have. Food, shelter, referrals, paperwork, connection to healthcare, all of these amazing pillars and pieces of poverty reduction. But we've often missed the basics. Truly knowing someone, walking beside them, believing with them, not just for them. We used to have a saying when I worked in harm reduction that our job was to keep people alive, to serve them another day. But it begs the question, at what point do we bring people out of survival into thriving? And how can we support folks to do that through a number of different strategies? So Heather, these are some reflective questions that you asked us to ponder. And I'm curious if you just want to chat a bit about the slide and really ask these questions.
Yeah, so as we're going about the webinar today, part of the discussion I had with Kathryn prior to this is to helping you just stretch yourself and reflect on the processes, you yourself and how you show up, and see if there's little things that you can do, and also celebrate. And so some of these reflective questions are really about who really are the producers of the change in the community? Is it your organization? Is it you? Is it the people that you're serving? How can we actually create produce? Where is the energy in the community and how do you elevate that? Who are the primary investors in the community? What assumptions have you made? And one example is we assume that people who are living in poverty don't have the time or energy, want, need, or purpose to help with the solution. And we shouldn't be assuming. We should actually be listening and going where the energy is. And where have we created a dependency instead of the deepening of the belonging? And so as we go about here, this is how we want to stretch you out of your comfort zone and to that little bit. Or as I say, that box you created, how can you turn it into a triangle or a circle or a star?
I love that. Thank you. So these reflective questions really will help us shift from a mandate first mindset into a people first mindset. And they really help us name where belonging already exists on the continuum of spaces that people occupy. And once again, we will be sending out all of these wonderful resources for you to bring back and give you some practical tips and tips in part 2. So where we are. Not the worst place, but I think we can really talk about that we cannot know where we're going unless we know where we are. And this is a really honest moment. A lot is happening in the world, and transformative change is coming, whether we like it or not. And so having some agency in that is where we're trying to build this momentum. The courage to see our current state clearly and to support real change for folks. So, as my friend Heather Keam says, the old ways won't open new doors. So many programs and many organizations are stuck at this maturity phase. This is called the eco cycle for folks that don't know. It's a liberating structure. We will send this out as a resource for folks, but it's the work is not linear. We're not just like, we start here and then we build a program and that program continues on forever and will always meet the need. The work is actually a cycle. So it goes from our idea and we grow it into maturity. And then we're like, oh, we need to stay here. We need to stay here. But if we actually start innovating and listening to our clients and honor their changing and shifting needs, I just said clients. Did you hear that, Heather? I'm still in the client mindset. My goodness. And at this moment, many of us feel the pull of what's familiar. But the old ways cannot open what we're trying to open now, which is systems of belonging, justice, and agency. Belonging is truly the deepest equity that you can build. So yeah, thank you. So because many programs are stuck in the maturity phase, we have a lot of fear. We have the fear of losing stability that keeps us from innovating. Creative destruction feels risky, and I promise that it's necessary, and it's not as scary as you think. Renewal requires trust, agility, shared leadership. And as we said, the work is not linear, it's cyclical. So most of our poverty reduction systems do live in that maturity, stable, predictable, familiar space. But when you go into creative destruction, it also looks like belonging-based innovation. It's not that you're destroying what came, it's that you're innovating what can be. When we focus on delivering programs.
I'm gonna jump in here.
Yeah, go ahead.
No. You finish this. I'll end it.
Okay, great. When we focus on delivering programs instead of building relationships, the system becomes the star. But belonging requires us to actually make people at the center and build mechanisms to keep them there. Go ahead, Heather.
I was just going to say, because here is where I actually, as somebody who was in public health and municipal government, when we were trying to do this work, this is where the hairs of my neck would stick up. This is where my shoulders would go up. And I had this, I think it would actually create some tension. And it's not about throw out your mandate, forget all about it. but it's looking at the community first and listening, and then seeing, does your mandate really fit here? Is this where it really belongs? Can I shift my mandate so I can really be in this community? Maybe, maybe our mandate is old. So going back to that maturity and the trap, maybe can we update what our mandates are? And so it's not saying get rid of it, throw the baby out of it, but it's just like that real reflection on how the community can dictate a mandate versus our mandate dictating community.
Stay on there, Heather, because this next one is actually inspired by you as well. So this is a Heather Keam specialty. You cannot programatize community. You cannot program mutuality. You cannot structure reciprocity. These grow in places of belonging, one relationship at a time. Go ahead, Heather.
So this came out of a conversation with former Mayor Lisa Helps from the city of Victoria. And we were talking about just this conversation. And I was like, we have to stop programmatizing community. And that was like a massive light bulb. And so we have to rethink what we mean by program, and what is the purpose of a program. And so asset-based community development and these circles here, if you think about the assets within the community and how I shared it, when you find out the gifts and assets of somebody, you're building trust with them, and they're building trust with you and your organization. The reciprocity is, once you identify that Heather's really good at Excel and she loves people and can sing, when you need that, you say, Heather, I want your beautiful voice. And I say, yes, I will give you my beautiful voice, but I really want peppermint tea. It's that reciprocity that happens once you know what people like. And the accountability, once I get stuff out in work, there's some accountability on my part to make sure it's used, to make sure it's known, seen. And there's accountability on your part to utilize it. And I like this idea of, if someone gave you a beautifully wrapped gift with a beautiful bow on it, they're going to give it to you. You don't say, sorry, no, I don't want it. You would never do that. But what you identify and find in a community, imagine that as beautifully wrapped that you have to unopen and you have to use. And that comes into the kind of the agency piece too. So, and that all creates that shared action where I think I'm going to put it out there. There's going to be a day when we won't need programs, because the community just does community.
Oh, that's amazing, Heather, because we can talk about this idea of like working ourselves into an exit strategy. Just stay here for a second, Orpa. I want to talk about like real change requires relationship for a moment. That impact happens at the speed of trust. For anyone that works in and around Indigenous communities, you've maybe heard this Brene Brown quote where it takes 1,000 coffees to start scratching the surface of an issue or a need. No relationship equals no accountability and no transformation. The work is two-sided, right? It's you and the person. Relational work strengthens agency, identity, and hope. And programs can support relationships, but they cannot replace them. Go ahead, next, Orpa. Thank you. I actually am hoping that you'll speak to this slide, Heather.
So it's funny how you said, ooh, I said the word client. Because as soon as we use the word client, we see them as somebody we're servicing. If we could use the word producers. So I am having a call with one of our producers. That just changes the narrative and the way that we think and approach community. And so how do we experience people as those who are lived experience and living in poverty as the producers of change, right? Not as the recipients of your work. And I think going back to that mandate piece, if we really rethink our mandate, this part here will actually come naturally. We do know that people in our communities, they know what the challenges and are. They know what needs to happen. They know the solutions, and they know who needs to be part of the solution. And I'm going to say when you use, and language is really important too. If you go into a community and you say, what do you need? And what are the issues and challenges? You're just going to get a complaint fest, right? And then it's going to be so big that you have no idea. You've taken one issue with speeding in our streets and you're saying, let's talk about this, into like this massive community citywide issue. But when you reverse the conversations and say, you know what do we have here that can help with speeding on the streets? Oh, well, I can park my car on the streets. I can, this, I can use that. And so you're changing it so that you can figure out what solutions are. And then what are some of those areas that we couldn't figure out what was there? That's where you would actually help. So that whole strengths-based belonging piece and the deficits lead to programs. Because strengths, you can actually see yourself in the solution. Deficits leads to services and programs.
Thank you, Heather. Yeah, communities are filled with producers. Look at the folks that we serve. They know how to stretch, survive. Oh, can you mute, Heather? Thanks. Folks in our communities know how to stretch, survive, solve, innovate. Our role needs to be in that amplification piece. We need to amplify, not overwrite, which really requires a different type of thinking and not just silence either, right? And to change a life, relationship must exist. Not a file, not a referral, not even a warm handoff to a client for a client, not a shift log, but a real relationship. And some of us do this really well inside of our programs, and it can be transformational for people. And we in person facing roles or program design sometimes lose this due to just the pure urgency of service delivery. Thank you. Where we're going, hopefully, where we want to go. Hey, Heather. This section, we're going to shift into some aspiration, direction, and actionable kind of future state practice while staying grounded and belonging. So this really is about direction, what's possible when belonging becomes the cornerstone of our approach to poverty reduction. So Ruth Matarama, totally amazing social activist, Nobel Prize winner in India. I have tremendous confidence in the capacity of the poor to transform not only their lives, but also to build a just, humane, and democratic society. And that really kind of underpins what we're talking about today. So the ABCDs of building connection. In this case, it's not asset-based community development. It's really assets, belonging, community, and development. You can take this one, Heather, if you'd like.
Do you want to do it? It's right down.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, I would absolutely. So assets. Thanks for mentioning that when people share their gifts with you, we are accountable to utilizing them. And I think a lot of people in the harm reduction and the poverty reduction movement really see this and believe it because relationship is such a core piece of what we do. So mobilizing the strengths and gifts that are already present. I remember there are so many stories of people's amazing talents and lives before they showed up to our services. And not just getting people back to that space, but really utilizing the amazing talents and different things that they have, you can see the immediate shift in how people carry themselves. If someone shows up and they're an amazing artist and you want to write a post, you want to create a poster or something for an event coming up and utilizing that art, and also offering some honoraria or something in reciprocity for that, it's like such a key piece of how people show up and trust the systems that are serving them. The belonging piece is really about creating the accessible spaces of welcome and connection. There's an idea of like a third space that people need to have. So like people need to feel welcome in a park or in a swimming pool or in a public space in order to really feel like they belong and they have agency inside of their community. For building community in this case, it's really about building networks of mutual support. Again, if we're, programmatic level folks, we really want to be looking at this exit strategy. How can this person be sustained in their community with their peers, with the leaders in their community, all of those things. Mutual aid is a large trend that's coming up more and more for folks, and it's working incredibly well in lots of different places, always has, always will. And so building those networks of mutual support so that people can fan out the support and relationships is so important to their resilience. And then, of course, co creating the pathways for participation and leadership. People with lived experience know the issues, they know the deficits, they know the possibilities, and they know what they need to seek solutions. Having those folks in positions of power and really enshrining that can help shift systems. Next, please, Orpa.
Yeah.
So, hope and possibility are the bedrock of belonging. Hope is a social determinant of health. Possibility fuels self belief and future orientation. Poverty erodes hope through ongoing scarcity and stress, but belonging restores hope by connecting people to their community. It's not our job to fix people, it's our job to support them to see possibility. When people lose hope, they lose agency. Poverty is as much emotional and relational as it is economic. Belonging is the antidote. It reconnects people to community and to themselves. Do you want to add anything, Heather?
I was just going to say, if you line this up, when you start with the deficits and the challenges in the community, it actually stifles and puts out the fire of hope and possibility. And so why would we start that way? Right? Why
Yes.
wouldn't we start with what is strong and what is wrong and elevate hope and possibility? Because pretty much people, when there's hope and possibility,
Mhm.
they'll get out of the pajama bottoms, get off the screen, and get into community when there's hope and possibility. So why wouldn't we build off of that?
I love that. And also, I read something recently that said in a high tech world, we need to become more high touch. And I just feel like that is so key to what we're trying to do here. Go ahead, Horpa. So, measuring what matters. How do we measure these things? We will talk about this in part 2. Again, we're just kind of laying some important foundation of how we want to shift the way that we do things in order to really embed equity and belonging. But, traditional metrics do track outputs, not outcome. We do have the quality of life index, with Heather actually was at the ground floor of at McGill University, so appreciating that. And well-being is the true north. Poverty work must move beyond services and into belonging, trust, agency, and hope. And these are actually measurable, trackable, and transformative. So, Heather, I'm going to put the actual prompt into the chat. But would you like to do this reflection exercise with folks?
So I was having a conversation with Kathryn, and I was like, I'd love for you to all surround, right? And think of a time where you felt like you belong, where you felt that there was this hope and possibility, whether it was with a program or an activity. Okay. And as you're going through this, what are those feelings that come from that? When you see that this, how does it smell? How do you see this, right? And then, and that's you as a human being, okay, being part of this. Now open your eyes and think, how are you helping those that you serve to have that same that same vision, that same sense of smell, that same sense of hope and possibility?
You know, Heather, you're cutting out a tiny bit because you're on the road. So I'm just going to
Okay.
go directly into the exercise. Thank you. So, like, just really
Okay.
thinking about how it feels to truly belong, the relaxed shoulders, the no tension in the body, the warmth, all of those things. And now I guess we'll ask you to close your eyes and think of a time that you just helped someone on the street. Perhaps it was a senior who couldn't find her car keys and they were clearly like dangling out of her purse and you just like went over there and grabbed them for her. Or maybe you opened the door for someone who had like a pile of kids that was like clearly doing a giant grocery shop for their family. Just thinking about really like how that felt in that moment. It's just it's just as easy as breathing for most of us. It just feels so good just to be like, oh yeah, here's the door, no problem. And like moving on with your day and that lift that you get. And so if you like consider how those things work, and then if you think about putting on your work hat and helping as a worker, why does it feel different? Why does it feel different, Heather?
I'm my internet's not so good. What did you say?
That's okay. You can address this another time. But yeah, why does it feel different? I think maybe because of rigid structures. There's like so many different reasons that it might feel different assisting someone at work, right? Than it does just in
Yeah.
the world. And it's also because the way that we have to categorize our relationships with folks. Being in relationship with people that we serve doesn't mean not having boundaries. It just means being in relationship. Okay. Oh, professionalism, someone put in the oh yeah, that's a good idea. You might maybe when you talk, you can turn off your camera next time, Heather. Thanks for that suggestion in the chat, folks. Um, Human helping is rooted in empathy and connection. System helping is constrained by policy, liability, professionalism, other things. And we've actually done a really good job of systemizing what is relational. The gap between the two is where harm can occur. This reflection reveals the emotional dissonance in our work, or what can be emotional dissonance in our work. Or if you're in authentic relationship with someone and you're like moving through life alongside them, there may be other structures that are also forcing you into a different space that you have that you have to have that emotional dissonance at work. But people feel that gap. Community feels the gap, but belonging closes the gap. This work is not 9 to 5. It's human work. People don't stop needing connection at 4:30 p.m. on a Friday. And belonging doesn't end during business hours either. We could go to the next one, Orpa. Oh, sorry. I thought
I
I
was just gonna
muted
say,
for
I love
that.
what
Go
Courtney
ahead.
just put into the chat box,
Yes.
right?
It
In
feels different
terms
to me
of,
because being in relationship and acts of community service and love are often seen as unethical or not part of the policy. When working with clients, support folks, oh, wait, not like that.
no. I was just gonna say, I think the thing is our metrics and how we measure and how we are evaluated on our work actually causes us to not be able to build the relationships. And so again, when you're looking at the old way and new way, how do we meet in the middle, and how can we bring the? I'm actually not going to bring in love. I'm going to bring in relationship and trust, because that can actually be seen as part of the work that we do. And love actually helps. Love actually, when you bring love in, there's more of a gray area, and it's not as clear, and it's kind of you can tip in one way. So I'm thinking you trust in relationships, bringing that in. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Like, we are just dipping our toes in here, and I love these types of comments, because we cannot going to change. It's taken us years to get here, right? But it's our mindsets and how we see things.
Lakshmi just put a really interesting comment in the chat, and that's actually how I feel. That's where my emotional dissonance comes from too, which is that extension of the organization and building trust in this like system or structure that's been created. Our systems have been built on urgency, this urgent need. Children are hungry. That's urgent. It should be urgent. These things are urgent, but urgency is not a foundation, right? Well-being is a foundation. Belonging is a foundation. Community care is a foundation. And these are really those cornerstones that hold the arc together of society. In our next session, because I know it's 12 minutes to, and we want to get to some questions and maybe some discussions if folks have if folks want to make the time for that. But I want to talk about just at our next session how we're going to sort of tackle some of these issues. Today was really like philosophical and foundational, but the practical and achievable interventions at micro or individual levels, meso at organizational levels. Appreciated that last comment, especially as an extension of organization, and macros like larger systems of funding and government mandates and other things at all of those levels to disrupt the poverty through embedding equity and belonging. And then there's a lot of emerging and promising practices that we can adopt that are happening in Canada throughout our member communities and other places, and just some data and indicators that measure well-being that we can start looking at. For example, when there's an uptick, so I'll just talk about the Clothat region because that's where I live, and Auntie Cookie as well. We know that when there's an uptick in leisure access passes, which is like a free pass to the recreation center, that's part of our provincial benefits in BC. All community centers offer that. We know when there's an uptick of leisure access passes that are being used, people are able to access that service in a really good way. We know that people are feeling more belonging in that space. Some of the things that the good people of Parks and Recreation at our city have been doing are assisting with that, for example. I'm not saying that's actually happening in our community, Cookie, like don't get mad. But I will say that that is an indicator of how much people feel belonging. There's also a belonging index and a number of different things that we'll go through at our next session. And then after today, you'll receive an email with this recording, all of the resources and slides, everything that you could need. And we're going to send out a beautiful ABCD readiness tool that Heather has drafted that you all will be able to pilot to see just how ready your organization, you, or some of the systems that you're working in are ready to adopt some of these practices, so that we're hoping that people can get some really practical space, like just, oh, thank you, Becky. See you later. We'll just be able to adopt some of these practices to start shifting these systems in a good way. Go ahead, Orpa. And then questions. I'm going to look in the Q&A here. There's no open questions. Does anyone have questions, comments, anything that they'd like to share or ask the beautiful Heather Keam?
Maybe while we're waiting for folks to pop in anything that they're carrying, we'd love to see your comments as well about how you're reacting to some of what was presented. But I'd love to hone in on the hope as a determinant of health piece. And Heather shared the example of using an ABCD approach to build hope and possibility by naming people's gifts and assets first and starting with that. I'm wondering, are there other examples that you might be able to share with your frontline experience, Kathryn, about what building hope and possibility looks like? And then maybe this ties into your answer, but Sue also asks, are there books or articles to learn more?
Yes. So I'm actually going to put in the chat right now the Hope Index, which is a great way that people can measure how hopeful they are. In our experience, so I've been at Tamarack for 1 year now, and previous to that, I was working in a community development role, coordinating the overall community response to the toxic drug supply emergency in our community through a collective impact space. By centering the people with lived experience and co-designing their programs and listening to what they truly needed and building programs out of that were fully staffed with people with lived experience, people came and people stayed. Courtney, I know you can't come off mute, but we created a number of programs that people with lived experience of substance use are still working in through meaningful employment, for example. And because they're serving their peers and that we're able to like support them in a good way to build and maintain their own programs and create everything as iterative. If something's not working, let's talk to folks and shift it. If we're hearing from folks that something really is working, how can we scale that? Everything shifted and changed over about 5 years of those programs, and those programs are still in existence. The state of them, I don't know. I'm no longer working there, but just giving folks the ability to find purpose and meaning and serve themselves and their own community, I know was transformative. So I'll just say one example. One of my most wonderful mentors, her name is Pat. She's now retired, but she was the team lead for child and youth mental health for our entire region. PhD in psychology, brilliant woman, very like still waters run deep. And after about 2 years of our collective impact process, the centering people with lived experience and full participation of people with lived experience, she made a comment to me just saying that she had really noticed over time some of our more marginalized folks could be seen in really like sitting differently, speaking more loudly, sharing their ideas more freely, happy to put up their hand and speak to issues, coming with us to public meetings to talk to mayor and council in these really intimidating spaces, and really like having the ability to sort of like speak their truth to power was something that she found so transformational that we actually created an entire youth component of that process. Um, to empower and give the youth anything that they wanted, like sky's the limit. They could create any program, anything that they wanted. And that was and still is a very successful piece of the work in our community. And so, like, you just see how folks flourish and shift over time. Folks have left our programs now to move on to different things, started their own business, bought a house, different things. And I'm not saying like we are responsible for that, but folks being able to be comfortable and safe enough in a space to be cared about and be listened to, believed, and actioned actually did have a transformative effect in ways that I can't even fully describe.
Thanks for that, Kathryn. I love the idea of like that sense of belonging just shifting, but being sustained over time. Like it
Yes.
shifts into other things, but it really speaks to what you're saying about the cornerstone. And go ahead, Heather, if you want to add anything before we close.
Well, I was just going to say the cornerstone. Like we didn't actually go into what that meant, and sometimes people don't know what that means. Is when you're doing an arch, this cornerstone is what holds it all up. And way back in the slides, we had two, and the traditional cornerstone was putting the issue that holds it all together. And I'm a very visual person. And so putting belonging as a cornerstone, we know that we can help address mental health. So we know we can address substance use. We know we can address conflict. We know we can, because that's the cornerstone. So we actually position it so that it will hold up everything we want. We want people to be included. We want people to be healthy. And so that's that cornerstone. And so I actually ask you to think about, what is your cornerstone that you're working in and with? Does it start in a deficit cornerstone, or are you working in an asset cornerstone?
Thanks, Heather. I think we have maybe time to get to one more question from Lakshmi. How do you scale empathy and belonging when you are working at a provincial or municipal level? And then if you want to close this out, Kathryn, that would be great.
Heather, do you want to start?
You know, so it's the how and who you're doing this with, right? And so at a provincial level, you're creating a sense of belonging down to the municipal level, and that they see themselves in creating a purpose and change at a provincial level, just like provincial sees at a federal level. So it's more working internally with staff and departments. Municipal has a real big role, and how they see community. So in that connection amongst community, and that's where I see the sense of belonging, having a deeper, more lasting change with belonging. And it's the how, which I'm going to say we'll dive into next time. Next
Yes.
part 2.
That's what I was just going to say. So Lakshmi, we're going to talk about really like those systems level pieces, which is municipal and provincial levels, in part 2, which is your part in building connection. So there's lots of different ways to embed equity. One way is through like policy, trust-based philanthropy, shifting mandates. There's actually like a lot of things that can happen, but we will really talk about, oh, thank you very much, Orpha. But we will really talk about some of those practical spaces that people can occupy without doing that thing where the change maker takes on all of the onus and responsibility for shifting the systems by themselves. It's just not possible, but there are a lot of ways that we can show up in this work differently that can shift the experience of service recipients and folks that we're trying to work in relationship with. I will say that I will not be here at part 2 because I'll be in the air coming back from a conference in Winnipeg, but Orpha and Heather will be here to support this conversation. And we just want to let you know that we thank you so much for coming here. Oh, thanks, Courtney. Thank you so much. Please fill out a webinar survey. You'll be getting one. Again, we will be sending out all the resources, the recording, the slides, and a number of different things that we weren't able to fully capture today. 1 hour goes quite quickly. And just letting folks know that in the new year too, the National Poverty Institute will be coming in to share what they've heard from communities across Canada. So stay tuned for that. And we will see you all very soon. Thank you so much. Thank you, Orpha.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Heather.
Bye.
Bye.